And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. And tonight we thought of talking about Sri Lanka and the international community. Sri Lanka's human rights situation, whether the conversation on alleged human rights violations have come under spotlight and whether there is implications against or on Sri Lanka. I've invited to our studios none other than a very important former diplomat, a former foreign secretary, an individual who was working with New Delhi, New York, Geneva and Washington during crucial periods of Sri Lanka's recent history. Ambassador Prasad Kariyawasam, former Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka, former Ambassador to the United States, Permanent Representative in Geneva and former High Commissioner to India. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to join you.
Certainly an important time to have this conversation while you're visiting us here in Sri Lanka. Ambassador, I know you wouldn't be speaking in your capacity or as a member of the diplomatic corps of Sri Lanka in the past, but in your this would be your personal views. But at the same time, we're talking about Sri Lanka here. In the recent past week, we came under a lot of scrutiny. Sri Lanka's alleged war crimes, allegations against violations of human rights have come under spotlight in relation to a recent interview circulated internationally. You have been ambassador to Sri Lanka during the final stages of the war, and also, or you additional secretary to the foreign ministry during the final stages of the war. Let's go into detail. But first, what do you think about what's happening?
Well, the interview you referred to is now on stream, and for whatever reason, it brought back some other things that happened in the past, which we should have been able to settle, so to say, after some time, end of the war with LTT, but it didn't happen, so therefore it came up. Issue remains that international community, including India and US, supported Sri Lanka to defeat LTT as a terrorist group, because if you take US, it was the first country to ban LTT as a terrorist organization. India banned it as a terrorist organization before Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka fought this war against terrorists, and we had support for defeating terrorism. But some countries, at the same time, were warning Sri Lanka against alleged rights violation during the conflict and after the conflict. So this issue has been on the table for a while, and especially after we defeated LTT in 2009 and on the eve of LTT defeat. We had support from countries like China and Pakistan with regard to arms supplies, which Sri Lanka managed to somehow get arms required for the fight of war against a terrorist group, a major terrorist group. And there was global support to defeat terrorism. But there was also a lot of pressure on Sri Lanka with regard to alleged rights violation during the conflict, mainly from Western democracies. So that was the challenge that we faced during the period that you referred to, immediately after the 2009 period.
Again, you were additional secretary for working in Sri Lanka's foreign ministry. I think you would have a lot of observations also to share with us, some that you can share, some that you might not want to share with us. But yet, these, especially when Sri Lanka dealt with some of the major powers, especially India, the United States, those who were working with Sri Lanka or those who were pressurizing Sri Lanka. What were your observations on how the Sri Lankan government, how they dealt with these countries?
I think at that time government was smart. Government knew that we need to balance our effort in militarily defeating LTT and defending ourselves against allegations of rights violations. And especially, so that was a balance that government achieved during that time so that they could take to logical conclusion. But as I said earlier, to defeat terrorist group, there was support, international support for Sri Lanka,
So are you
terrorist
saying,
group.
Are you saying India, the United States,
Yes.
supported Sri Lanka in this mission?
India and United States clearly was supporting Sri Lanka to defeat terrorist group.
On the grounds that
On
this
the
was a
grounds. But
terror
they were also equally hard on Sri Lanka, saying that you have to do this in a manner that the rights violations has to be protected. Right violations should not be allowed. And that is because those countries had large Tamil diasporas who were breathing down on their neck because they were democracies, that there are civilians who are getting harmed in the process of this conflict. So in other words, countries like India and USA were conflicted themselves, because on the one hand they want to defeat a terrorist group, on the other hand they have to listen to their electorate, their lobby groups with regard to alleged violations. So we have to understand, and the government at that understood that and kept a good balance. I think our leaders, we were able to handle that.
Are you saying Sri Lanka was able to not antagonize these superpowers and major countries who were in support of Sri Lanka to defeat terrorism, our closest neighbor India and the US, while they were mounting pressure on Sri Lanka?
Yes, I think we were successful in that effort up to 2009. If not for that support, which some of the specific support we cannot disclose in public, specific support given by some powerful nations, but it's a fact that the government was able to do that due to the diplomatic as well as military strategies applied by the government.
When you say powerful nations, are you talking about India?
You have to decide which one I'm talking about.
The European Union? Ambassador, these resolutions that were sponsored against Sri Lanka and a couple co-sponsored by Sri Lanka. 2009 resolution concerning the promotion and protection of human rights in Sri Lanka. 2012 calling the government to implement recommendations from the Lessons Learnt and Reconciliation Commission with a number of other recommendations, and 2013 recommendation urging Sri Lanka to continue efforts towards reconciliation, again on accountability after the civil conflict, encouraged increased cooperation with the UN and more inclusive approach to transitional justice, and 2014 urging Sri Lanka to address ongoing human rights violations, including violence against minorities, enforced disappearances and restrictions of freedoms of expression. 2015 resolution, there's a resolution in 2017, again 2019, 2021, 2022, 2024. You earlier mentioned that this was an issue that Sri Lanka could have settled earlier. And these resolutions, as a democracy, do you think Sri Lanka has handled this situation well?
Well, first let me give a very important fact. Resolutions that take place in Human Rights Council in Geneva are not made in Geneva. Geneva is only the theater. It's an expression of various countries who are sponsoring, peddling the resolution. Their local, their national positions are reflected in these resolutions. So Geneva is a theater. Now we have had series of resolutions about Sri Lanka since 2009. And out of that series you mentioned, 2 resolutions Sri Lanka sponsored. 2009 resolution, Sri Lanka sponsored one. There's a Sri Lanka sponsored resolution in 2009. In 2016, there's a Sri Lanka co-sponsored resolution. Then there are other resolutions where Sri Lanka voted against and campaigned to to defeat. So there is no one clear strand in this process. What is clear is only one thing. There was concern, international concern, mainly from the Western countries, rising out of the pressure they receive in democratic way in their own countries, to make Sri Lanka accountable for alleged crimes committed during the and after the war. Now the word war crimes is a very, very broad word. I don't want to use the word war crimes because many in the international community give a lot of credit for Sri Lankan security forces to the manner in which they conducted this conflict and concluded it. They think Sri Lankan security forces are a professional outfit, capable set of people. But at the same time, there are allegations against some individuals, some sections of the security forces for rights violations, which we only still have only the allegations. We have neither Sri Lanka nor the international community has been able to have a proper inquiry to ascertain whether it's true or not. It hasn't happened. 2009 resolution actually had a very interesting, which we co-sponsored. Sri Lanka promised to the international community that we will implement the 13th Amendment. It is that first time Sri Lanka gave an international guarantee in a resolution sponsored by us that we will implement the 13th Amendment. We haven't done that. That's 2009. A resolution that Sri Lanka said we won the resolution. Then 2016 resolution, which we co-sponsored, Sri Lanka's effort was to bring the discussion of the whole issue to Sri Lanka and promise we are going to set up local domestic mechanisms to address all the issues. We have only gone halfway on that. We were promising that we will set up institutions, mechanisms to have truth commission to address missing persons and to have a justice mechanism if there are sufficient evidence to prosecute anyone, all locally. But then after some time, I think governments changed and that resolution was rejected by Sri Lanka. Then you mentioned other resolutions.
Right.
When there is no resolution of these allegations, issue doesn't go away. Issues remains in the table. Now if you look at what happened in Philippines, President Duterte was taken into ICC yesterday. Allegations, unless it is resolved locally, will remain always on the table. Now we have a similar issue in Geneva. We have a resolution against Sri Lanka. I would say you can use against or resolution on Sri Lanka, counter resolution. That whole effort is to keep this issue alive. That is that allegations about crimes committed in Sri Lanka has not been examined, has not been concluded whether it's true or not. So they are keeping, the UN Human Rights Council is keeping a record of all the evidence that they have received. It is not a good situation for Sri Lanka to be. So Sri Lanka is now rejecting that resolution. This time also, I think this government also rejected the resolution. But in the long term, in my view, just rejecting won't take the issue go away.
So what can Sri Lanka do differently? It has been so long since the war ended, and victims and those whose families who had lost their loved ones call for some closure and ask the government, Sri Lanka, to give them answers about disappearances to the victims. And there are also allegations that the military Sri Lankan forces committed alleged crimes there are specific numbers that are shared as part of evidence at the UN Human Rights Council as well. But how should Sri Lanka as a government really work with them? You mentioned a few areas that Sri Lanka should have completed as pledged to the Council itself, from the 13th Amendment to the local mechanism. The 13th Amendment, a political solution, let's put that aside for now. But apart from the mechanisms to everything, what can this government do now?
Well, very important question. This government has an opportunity as we go along. Although this government now rejected the resolution, this government has an opportunity when it comes to next October, is the resolution is coming up for renewal, to have a conversation with the main sponsors, main core group of sponsors who are sponsoring this resolution on Sri Lanka, and come to some kind of understanding as to what we can do to conclude this. And we have now gone halfway. We have set up, the Office of Missing Persons is there. We have to make it very vibrant, very agile. It was set up. We have Office of Reparations, it's set up. Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not yet, but we can make it a very and then government idea of having an independent prosecutor is another good idea where we can fit in that into this. And come to and talk to the sponsors and come to an understanding of a path that we will take to resolve this issue. I think it owes, you mentioned about the victims. Actually, security forces are also victims, because as I mentioned, our security force as a whole has a good reputation. They can be employed in international peacekeeping. There are a lot of opportunities for them. But the fact that this issues has not been resolved is militating against more opportunities for Sri Lankan security forces to go and work in the international arena as peacekeepers. If you take South Asia, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they have a large number of peacekeepers. Sri Lanka is small number. We should increase that number. We can do that. So our security force also are victims. So there are so many victims in this. Allegations are against only few people.
Only a few people. So are you saying the few people are using the military as a cover-up, the security forces as a cover-up, and not addressing this?
I'm not saying you said that. I'm not saying that. But anyone with some intelligence can come to easy conclusions of what I'm saying. But we have to Sri Lanka cannot keep this issue on the table thinking it will go away. It won't go away.
Ambassador, now the Sri Lankan military, you continue to highlight how the international community, these countries, have also praised the military for their mission, humanitarian mission against the Ltte, a terror outfit. So in that sense, isn't the Sri Lankan government turning a blind eye or turning their back on the very military, the security forces who fought a terrorist outfit, a terror organization banned by the United States, to the European Union, to India, to all countries, an internationally recognized terrorist organization? So what should happen internally, really? You mentioned the security forces are victims. So how do you really bring back that pride and some sort of closure for the security forces as well?
There's a responsible for the media. Sometimes some media outlets in Sri Lanka, I won't name because it's invidious for me to say that, they propagate misinformation about whole issue. They think they portray this as a Western country initiated witch hunt against Sri Lankan security forces. As a whole, that is not true. So it is very specific. It can be easily solved if we do certain things. Just because you have an inquiry does not mean you are going to convict anybody. There should be evidence to convict people, but you should have something. So we need to explain to the public, explain to security force, explain to everyone, and show that we are a democratic, accountable country and we are transparent in our work with regard to these issues, and we are not protecting specifically anyone who may have conducted or who may be guilty. But it could be, we could end up that we cannot find anyone guilty on some of the allegations. But without having an inquiry, you cannot do that. So that's the issue. We are not addressing. We can do this inquiry. 2016 resolution was to bring the whole process to Sri Lanka. Whole process, including everything to be done in Sri Lanka, not internationally.
So what prevented that?
We rejected the resolution of 2000 after government, Sri Lanka withdrew from the resolution. And we didn't follow up. Then later on, we had half-heartedly, we were trying to do few things to make it happen. But it doesn't, it's not, there is no real commitment to settle. Key is to talk to the sponsors.
But there is also a certain thought that co-sponsoring is going against the country, or working with the UNHRC would be humiliating the security forces, or going against and accepting these rights violations, allegations. What are your thoughts?
I think those who say that haven't read the resolution, 2016 resolution 30/1. They haven't read it. And read it carefully. It is a resolution that accepts that Sri Lanka will set up, Sri Lanka will set up a certain mechanism to address all these issues locally. How that is against the country, I don't understand, because Sri Lanka has a judicial system respected in the world. Sri Lanka is a democratic nation who should show that we are accountable, transparent, and doing, when we, rather than allowing international tribunals, international community doing something in Geneva, elsewhere, when we bring everything to be done in Sri Lanka, what's the problem? I don't understand. So, co-sponsorship is that we say that we are committing fully to do this. That's about it.
But
for some reason it became unpopular, absolutely unpopular, and people reject that.
But what lessons can we take maybe from other countries who have engaged with the Council as well in terms of responding to and working on certain allegations? Not that we see superpowers doing this. Major atrocities have been carried out against humanity, but still Sri Lanka as a democracy has a responsibility and, as you said, accountability to victims, no matter which side they're from.
Exactly. Using this argument, US is doing that, some other countries doing this, and therefore we can also do something, is not a good argument. We should instead take the high moral ground. We are a democracy. We are the oldest democracy in Asia. We are being guided by Buddha's message of compassion, and we therefore we can handle these issues ourselves and have the confidence of doing that. And that is what we should be doing. And even to do that, we can have a conversation with those who are putting pressure on Sri Lanka to do those things, and find a method that will be acceptable by victims and everybody. It is not that difficult.
The diaspora seems continuously, as some portray them as enemies of the nation, others as those the country, the diaspora, can work together to bring in much needed revival, growth to the economy, and somehow the diaspora seems to be alienated from this process. Should they be brought in, or should the government listen to them? Because there seems to be a lot of pressure put by the diaspora in Western countries.
Diaspora, when you say diaspora, there are all communities in diaspora. There are communities, Tamil communities, Sinhala communities, and there are some who are very extremist. There may be some Tamil communities who are still separatist. There may be some Sinhala communities who are still Sinhala majoritarian. So we have to be mindful of all these shapes and types. But we have to get them involved and give them space and through that space, we will be able to find the middle ground that is good for the country. That in my view, never extremists can dominate. Extremism always get marginalized. But we have to work towards that. That is how Sri Lanka was able to defeat LTT, because LTT was considered by international community as extremists. So we could therefore marginalize them and defeat them. So similar thing applies to even these allegations. Some in diaspora communities are extreme. What they are asking and what they are pushing is far over the top. That's the responsibility the government can work with our state partners, states, and find solutions that will satisfy the core interest of our community, Sri Lankans. What is core interest is to closure for all these issues and bring back respect for security forces which already there, but to place them on the right profile they should be.
You were Additional Secretary during the time the then government took the initiative to defeat terrorism. The political decisions were taken by the government, working with the international community. You were Foreign Secretary during 2017 and 18. But do you think the Sri Lankan government has failed, governments after governments, have failed the civilians who faced acts of terrorism during 3 decades of war, and have failed to take the message to the international community about the atrocities, the crimes committed against civilians of the nation, effectively to the international community?
I think government have done that. To my mind, international community is fully aware of the atrocities committed by LTT, to my mind. That is why there was international support to defeat LTT as a terrorist group. But that doesn't include any human rights violations outside the theater of war. Most allegations, almost all allegations are pertaining to outside the theater of war. Those are crimes which a democratic nation that is transparent and accountable to its own people should address.
As Foreign Secretary, how would you observe Sri Lanka's foreign policy and working with the international community as former Foreign Secretary?
Which time you are talking about?
The present government.
This government has enormous amount of international empathy and support, is my observation. At the same time, the government must be nimble and strategic how to harvest that goodwill for the benefit of the country and its people. So government is quite new, I believe. The government, foreign minister, president, prime minister will have a strategy how to harvest that goodwill so that we gain out of that goodwill that exists for this government, especially because international community recognized the enormous mandate received by the government from north, south, east, west. And that is a mandate that especially democratic nations in the world recognize. They have never seen that happening in this country, and it happened. So there is a lot of expectations from the government, not only from Sri Lankans, but from international community.
A unity vote, as you say, and viewed by the international community as an exercise where the entire country came together. But isn't there confusion among the international community that the government's way forward or their stance and certain how they're going to respond to certain issues is unclear yet? So is this a failure of the government's part in working with the international community, or maybe sharing with the rest of the world about what Sri Lanka is going to do next?
These are still early days, so we should allow the government to let them. It's early days for the government. Government is on the right track. Maybe pace is slow. Maybe certain strategies should be adjusted as we go by, and have a path for instance, to settle the human rights issue in Geneva, to harvest the goodwill that is existing international community towards this government. So let's hope for the best.
So with incidents after incidents that may tarnish the image of Sri Lanka coming up, don't you think the government should act fast to work with the international community?
Sri Lanka is a nation since the time immemorial, located in a very important strategic location, but we are not a major military power in terms of capacity like, let's say, India or other major countries, but we are an important country in terms of our location. Sri Lanka's main tool we have for our prosperity and for our sovereignty, territorial integrity is our diplomacy. How we handle our international affairs is the key. So that is the key that we have to use carefully so that we get best benefit for Sri Lanka, and our foreign policy should be geared for that purpose. We should first recognize what is our interest, economic, political, and social, and then create partnerships with countries that are key for our economic and social prosperity. And that's a challenge that any government faces, and I think this government will have the same challenge, and I hope that they will be up to it. And they are still early days. We cannot say, still nothing had gone wrong, I would say.
Well, we'll take a short break here at Hyde Park. That's the first half of the program. We'll return to discuss more. We're in conversation with Sri Lanka's former Foreign Secretary, former Ambassador to the United States, India, and former Permanent Representative to the United Nations. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back. We're in conversation with Ambassador Prasad Kariyawasam, former Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka and former Ambassador to New Delhi, Washington, New York, and former Permanent Representative to the United Nations. You joined the Foreign Service in 1981, and since then you've been speaking at international fora, discussing with foreign missions, envoys, on behalf of Sri Lanka, continually. What should be Sri Lanka's foreign policy going forward? We've spoken about Sri Lanka being a non-aligned nation, and then I've met experts coming on my show saying, no, Sri Lanka should take a side now, understand who is beneficial and who's supportive of Sri Lanka. Does this mean we should take sides, or does this mean we need to treat certain powerful countries or extend special treatment to these powerful nations?
First, I should say that Sri Lanka's foreign policy since independence has not been a kind of very clear strategy. It has been evolving, changing, and then it's very dynamic, as it should be. Foreign policy should be dynamic. It can't be static. Now, countries like Australia has this, they have white paper on policy. We don't do something like that. So our policy keeps changing. So as you mentioned, Sri Lanka, as a reaction to the Second World War power blocks, Soviet Union and the American power bloc situation, which was, we also joined the non-aligned movement, and then that's since we are not talking about non-alignment, I will not go into that. Today, non-aligned movement, still there's a forum, but it is more a forum rather than a real policy-based organization. We should remain in that forum, but we have to think of our foreign policy a little more broadly and in a practical manner. First thing is that we should identify what is our national interest, because foreign policy emanates from national interest. What is our economic interest? What is our social interest based on the democratic practice we have had since 1931? What is our political interest, given that we are in a very crucial place in the Indian Ocean, right in the middle of the Orient, Sri Lanka. since we have been there for long years, and our even times, in the ancient times, our kings were mindful of that. That's why Anuradhapura kingdom time, kings sent envoys to the court of Augustus Caesar. At that time, Anuradhapura was one of the best cities in the world. So that is the framework at which we should approach foreign policy. First, identify our national interest and how to get there. And then we don't have to give a label to our policy like we are non-aligned, neutral, we are this, that is not required to my mind. What is required is to create a web of partnerships with countries that are key to our economic, social and political interests. And that is the strategy that has to evolve and that should be dynamic. It cannot stay in the same place because international players that are important for Sri Lanka also keep changing. And what we can do with them also keep changing. At this point, our main export markets are in the US and the Western world. But our main trading partner is India and China. We don't export anything to them, but they are the main trading partner and also they are major investors. So all are important, but we should know how to navigate this web of relationships we would have created, should create. Then 10% of population are working abroad. They are migrant workers. They send enormous amount of funds for Sri Lanka. And they are mostly in the Middle East, so we have to have an understanding of how to handle that aspect as well. So there's a lot of challenges, but our policies should be dynamic, should be partnerships, a web of partnerships, and we should not play zero-sum games with nations. Zero-sum approach is a difficult one. Let's leave that aside. But Sri Lanka needs to create web of partnerships, and I would call kind of a multi-directional approach to issues so that we get the best situation. There are countries in Asia that have done that well and thrived. Singapore. There are countries that has thrived that and emerging economies in Vietnam, Indonesia. So we have examples, countries doing that.
Sri Lanka's crisis also exposed how and when some of the nations came to Sri Lanka's support. And you've continuously mentioned that Sri Lanka should work closely with India.
Yes, Sri Lanka and India has a civilizational relationship. It's a civilizational relationship, and so we should be mindful of that. We are in the Indian Ocean. Name Indian Ocean means that India has a role in that ocean. We should be mindful of that too. Sri Lanka must keep a very close relationship with India going, and I'm very happy that we have a multi-party, or rather all-party agreement on that our relationship with India must be close and well managed, because India's progress will have a positive reflection on Sri Lanka. And if Sri Lanka is in trouble, it will have a negative reflection on India, and India is mindful of that. So that's why India is always there to help Sri Lanka if we are in trouble.
But these security concerns, especially maritime security, concerning the Indian Ocean and China's presence in Sri Lanka, which India, or media reports at least, highlight how this has threatened India. So do you think Sri Lanka is handling this well?
So far, we are handling it reasonably well, but we have to be also mindful of red lines that each country observe in this Indian Ocean sphere. Indian Ocean is a very active ocean. Trade, cyber connectivity, and since Sri Lanka depends a lot on supply chains, Sri Lanka is for our own well-being, and as as a hub in the Indian Ocean, with Colombo Port being a very, very important transshipment hub, we have to be mindful of the need to observe red lines of India and promote open, free in Indian Ocean, so that we will not have to handle conflicts. Open and transparent Indian Ocean security architecture will give Sri Lanka a situation where we don't have to handle conflict situations. So we should avoid conflicts in the Indian Ocean, and for that, whatever we have to do, we should do. And that involves having a very good conversation with India, which is our most important partner, and equally having a good conversation with others who are using Indian Ocean big time, China, US as the major maritime power in the world. There is no other maritime power like US. So we have to have a conversation with them, understand what is the reality, and then take decisions that will avoid any conflict in Indian Ocean.
With Donald Trump as US President once again, and threats of trade wars, and certain implications and challenges to supply chains, especially to our part of the world. Sri Lanka rising after a crisis, managing our own way out of the crisis with international support, of course. How do you think Sri Lanka should really grow internally as our industry, support for industries, especially at a time where there is a lot of threat or risk of losing external funding to the country? We spoke about USAID at one point, and now there's also a risk of losing external funding. And how do you think the country should work in partnership with the rest of the world again, but to figure out something of our own internally?
Yeah, this is a challenge because policies announced by Trump and his supporters, MAGA supporters, is upending the world order that was created by US itself after the Second World War was over. It's US that created what people call Pax Americana, American peace. So for 78 years we had world peace based on institutions and systems that are created by US by its leadership. Bretton Woods institution, IMF, World Bank, creation by US. UN is also creation by US. You know, US gave the leadership and funds it. So now the current policies that Trump seemed to follow, seem to change this and revolutionize this system, which may perhaps accelerate world becoming a multipolar world faster than we thought we ever imagined. Because still, to my mind, the world is unipolar with US domination in every sphere. But if what Trump says is going to be really implemented in its form, then the world will become a multipolar world, and it will become more, we have to be very smart to navigate that. But what is still, I am not too sure whether this policies announced by President Trump and others will be implemented as it is. These things will get adjusted as we go by, and we will have to handle a different world anyway, but not the way that not the doomsday scenario that a lot of people expect. But it's early days, but your question is, what should Sri Lanka do? Sri Lanka must get ready for it. In other words, we have to create, as you mentioned, other partnerships which we already have, and to see also what are the opportunities Sri Lanka may get out of new tariff regimes, new international trade order, new means readjustment of supply chains. There could be an opportunity for Sri Lanka than we can perceive at this point. So we have to be very vigilant very thoughtful, but not get dragged into the international politics of it. Stay calm, observe, and do what is best for us, best for Sri Lanka, at the right time, at the right place. So it's a lot of work for the government.
You're also a champion for regional integration. Does this situation also indicate that South Asia as a region, our part of the world, should come together more than ever now to be stronger as a bloc and also benefit from India's rapid development while also forging a network that will support one another?
I believe completely regional integration is good for Sri Lanka and for South Asia. It's unfortunate SAARC is not functioning, but we have BIMSTEC now. BIMSTEC summit will be held in Thailand. Sri Lanka regional cooperation, regional integration will bring Sri Lanka benefit both economic and social, especially because we are a democracy that is respected by South Asians. We are a democracy that has earned respect due to the way that our people vote and sometimes rebel even. That is also gain respect. So that is the key. But we also must understand that we have to work together, especially with India, to promote regional cooperation. Regional cooperation will not work in our region unless India gives a strong leadership. So India's leadership is key, and we have to perhaps work with India to nudge them towards doing more for regional cooperation. They say they would, but a lot more work to be done.
Can't Sri Lanka play a major role here as a hub or as a hub that promotes all countries to either go through Sri Lanka or work through Sri Lanka, especially given certain tensions in our region?
I think we have that opportunity, but to create that opportunity, to make that, we have to give confidence to our neighbor, India, as well as other countries, that whatever we do will be for their benefit as well. So it's a lot of work at this point because regional cooperation has not been working in our region well. A lot of projects that are on hold. We still don't have a proper free trade agreement in the region, which is what we have is a very basic agreement. So there's a lot of work to be done. But regional cooperation will give benefit to Sri Lanka without doubt, and India has a big role to play. It is India at the end of the day that should underwrite that effort.
We were talking about what we can do in Sri Lanka to promote local industries. There was discussion about arms and ammunition production within the country, factories for this. How viable do you think this is, especially when we talk about Buddhist philosophy, leadership in the country, and wars around the world, and the potential threats across the world?
Sri Lanka, our security forces requirements should be quite basic, because we are not going to build a security force to go and take over a country. Or our security forces are basically there, which includes Navy, to safeguard our sovereignty and integrity, and to keep peace in the region, keep peace in the country. Therefore, we don't need to spend on I would say, sophisticated arms that are required for intra-country regional conflicts. What we require is to basically defend ourselves in our own sphere. And if we have those requirements, building them by ourselves is the best economic decision we should make. Because first we have to determine what is the size of our security forces, which is important. Now we don't have a conflict to fight, so size of the security forces, which means what's the requirement of the army, what our Navy should be. Navy should have a bigger role because we have a large area of the sea that we have to patrol, so requirements of Navy is very big and we should provide that. So And if we can do that as much as indigenous building program, it's a good thing. For instance, Navy and dockyard can start building petrol crafts, and they are doing that already. So I think it's a good idea. But we should, before doing all that, we should determine what the size and what is the scope that the country needs in peace. Country like us, which has no conflict.
You speak about war and how Sri Lanka should protect itself, but at the same time we're talking about extremist elements. Sri Lanka fell prey to extremism in 2019 during the Easter attacks. And do you think the government or the system itself is geared to prevent and protect the country from these elements encroaching into our land?
This is a very important issue. That is where perhaps our intelligence services has a big role to play. They should be very professional in that. Without, they should focus on where they should focus. And extremism will be always a threat in our region, especially. And we should nip them at the bud. And we must do that with the support of communities concerned. We should not try to alienate the community leaders on account of preventing extremism. We should include them, and therefore those who handle that effort must be very clever and strategic in their approach. And if they do that, I think we can be sure we will avoid extremism in this country. And there's a big role for politicians to play, to my mind, that not to use extremism and extreme ideas as a vehicle for political expediency. That's the key. We have seen in the past some politicians using extremism as a tool to rev up the feelings and get votes.
Do you think it's fit for a country that is named as a Buddhist nation constitutionally? We speak about how the Buddhist philosophy itself lays out the foundation for a good leader. These politicians as leaders, how would you really share some thoughts on how they could refine themselves and gain insights from the philosophy that we have at our hands here in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, you said it right. I mean, we have, if you look at Buddha's core message, we should be doing everything to avoid extremism, because Buddha always preached middle path. And other major religions, Islam as well as Christianity, they also have similar ideas about it. And so our religions that we observe in this country, all three major religions, are peaceful. So therefore, it should be easy for the communities to do that. And so we need to have leaders and community leaders who will recognize this and not allow extremism to raise their head again. But for that also we should respect individual rights of every citizen. Rights of citizens, individual rights of all communities, citizens is very important, and we should learn how to respect that. And that's also, our religious leaders have a role to play, to my mind.
You served as the first chairperson elected to the UN Committee on Migrant Workers in 2003 and re-elected to the UN Committee on Migrant Workers. It has become very important across the world to have a conversation on migrant workers, and how important of an emphasis or a role should the government also play here when we talk about our very own?
Very good question. Over 10% of our people are migrant workers. Mostly they work in very difficult conditions in the Middle East and in Asia. And they need support of the government from the moment they leave these shores until they return. Successive governments have, of course, made a lot of efforts in that. And in that effort, alleged that a lot of corruption has crept into the systems, and we should try and find and avoid that. And our missions abroad, especially the Foreign Ministry, has a big role to play in this, to do their best in terms of being a service center for our migrant workers. We should be service oriented. We should have user-friendly embassies abroad, where public will feel comfortable when they come to the embassy. So we should select diplomats who have that empathy and strategy to make user-friendly missions where our large number of Sri Lankans are working. And we should have committed officers who should fight for the rights of the migrant workers in situ. I'm afraid we are still a long way from getting there, but I believe this government also will give leadership for that effort and avoid any corrupt practices that a lot of people allege that is happening. So that's a very important question. And then respect those migrant workers all the way, including at the airport, because some of them they are not well-to-do people, and they should be nurtured, they should be given respect and dignity.
An integral part of Sri Lanka's economy too.
Yes.
Where the foreign currency flows in from.
Exactly.
To keep the economy running.
Yeah, and some of them in the Middle East, they are working under enormous stress and difficult conditions. Only those who I worked in Saudi Arabia for 3.5 years during the first Gulf War. And there was war I faced during that time. I have personally experienced difficulties of migrant workers face and tried to help them, and some of them are still grateful for that efforts that we did at that time.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think we should dedicate another discussion for a conversation on the migrant workers, and especially how Sri Lanka can work to protect their interests. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kariyawasam, for your time here at Hyde Park. It was indeed a very informative and eye-opening discussion for us here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to participate, and it's also perhaps I feel it's my social responsibility to make these issues known. Some issues, some may disagree, but that's how the democracies work. But I gave my personal view on the basis of my experience. It has nothing against anyone personal. If anyone is hurt by my view, I apologize in advance, but that is the truth, but nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Prasad Kariyawasam, former Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka, former Ambassador to the United States, and High Commissioner to India, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Permanent Representative to the UN in New York between 2005 and 2008, and Ambassador, Permanent Representative again in Geneva in 2001, and served in various diplomatic missions, and importantly, Additional Secretary to Sri Lanka's Foreign Ministry during the final stages of the war, Vice Chairperson of the UN Commission on Human Rights and UN Committee on Migrant Workers as a committee member, and initially as its chairperson, and a champion of regional integration. We will join you next week with yet another discussion here at Hyde Park. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.